There is a very strange historical paradox. Sometimes a country becomes fantastically rich the exact second before its economy collapses into the abyss. And the most striking thing is that this ruin doesn't come from wars, crop failures, or barbarian invasions. It comes from a genius idea that was supposed to save everyone. How could a state, standing one step away from becoming the absolute financial center of the planet, burn its own economy to the ground in just a couple of years? Usually, this story is told in the driest way possible. There was a massive national debt, a cunning financier showed up, blew a massive bubble, and everything popped. But in reality, it was much more complex, deeper, and far more terrifying. This wasn't the mistake of a single con artist. This was a system that absolutely everyone believed in because it worked, or rather, it seemed to. To understand how an entire nation lost its mind, we have to look at the starting point, September 1715. Inside the Palace of Versailles, Louis XIV, the Sun King, a man who ruled France for over 70 years, is dying. Under him, the country became the premier superpower of Europe. A brilliant court, an invincible army, grandiose palaces. But all this splendor had a price, and that price turned out to be unbearable. The king left behind not only Versailles, but a national debt of almost 3 billion livres. France was practically bankrupt. Taxes were cranked to the absolute limit. Peasants were starving, and trade was dead in the water because the country simply didn't have enough gold and silver coins circulating. Power passed to the regent, Philippe II, Duke of Orleans. He took control of a country that looked like a luxurious palace on the outside, but on the inside was a rotting shed ready to collapse from a light breeze. Philippe understood. If nothing radical was done, a rebellion would erupt and the monarchy would fall. And at this exact moment of sheer desperation, a man appeared at the palace, offering not a reform, but a genuine miracle. His name was John Law, a Scotsman, a mathematical genius, a professional gambler, and a man with an incredibly dark past. In 1694, in London, he killed a man in a duel, was sentenced to death, escaped from prison, and wandered across Europe for years. But at the gambling tables of Amsterdam and Venice, he wasn't just winning fortunes, he was studying how money worked. And Law came to Philippe of Orleans with an idea that, for the early 18th century, sounded like absolute heresy. He declared, money is not gold, and it is not silver. Money is simply trust. Law convinced the regent that metal coins were only slowing down the economy because they were scarce and people hid them in chests. They needed to issue paper backed by the authority of the state. In 1716, John Law received permission to open the General Bank in Paris. He started printing paper banknotes, promising that anyone could exchange them for silver at any time, and something incredible happened. People timidly tried using the paper, realized it was vastly more convenient than lugging around sacks of coins, and the economy suddenly sprang to life. Credit became cheap, trade restarted. France began to breathe. John Law became a national hero. But the bank was only the first step. Law knew that paper money had revived trade, but it hadn't solved the main problem, the state's gargantuan 3 billion livre debt. And so he invented a mechanism that today we would call a venture capital megaproject. In 1717, he created the Mississippi Company, a corporation that received exclusive rights to develop Louisiana. Back then, Louisiana was a massive French territory in North America, stretching from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico. Officially, Law was offering the French people a chance to invest in the development of new lands, where, rumor had it, there were mountains of gold, emeralds, and endless fields of tobacco. But the true genius of the scheme lay elsewhere. Law allowed people to buy shares in this company, not with cash, but with government debt receipts. So a person owed money by the state would bring this depressing IOU that nobody wanted to pay and exchange it for a stake in a company promising fabulous wealth. Just like that, France's old dead debt dissolved, transforming into hope for future prosperity. By 1719, the situation began to spiral out of control, morphing into sweet madness. Law's company swallowed up all other French trading companies, gaining a monopoly on trade with Asia and Africa and a monopoly on collecting taxes within the country. Share prices began to grow at a terrifying speed. Yesterday, they were worth 500 livres, today 1,000, next month 5,000, and by winter, the price skyrocketed to 10,000 livres apiece. The narrow Parisian street of Rue Quincampoix, where the company's exchange was located, became the center of the world. Tens of thousands of people gathered there daily. Aristocrats sold their ancestral castles to buy shares. Peasants sold their land. Servants who bought a couple of papers at the right time became richer than their masters in a week. It was right here, on this very street, in 1719, that the word millionaire appeared for the first time in human history. Money was being created literally out of thin air. In January 1720, John Law reached the absolute summit. The man who had fled the gallows was appointed Controller General of Finances of France. Now he controlled everything. His personal bank was merged with the state bank. He managed the single megacorporation, he printed the money, and he collected the taxes. He held almost absolute power in his hands. And it wasn't the power of the sword, it was the power of the printing press and pure belief. France felt like the richest country in the universe. But right here, at the peak of triumph, the first grain of reality jammed the mechanism. The problem was that this entire gigantic financial pyramid was built on the promise of Louisiana's riches. But in reality, in 1720, Louisiana was nothing but wild, impenetrable swamps, swarming with mosquitoes and alligators. There were no mountains of gold. The profits from the colonies were microscopic, yet the share price kept rising. Why? Because John Law had made a fatal mistake. To maintain the rising share prices and satisfy the rabid demand of the crowd, he turned the printing presses on full blast. New paper banknotes were being printed for the sole purpose of buying new shares. More money meant higher prices. Higher prices meant more people wanting to buy. This perfect perpetual motion machine ran exclusively on greed and trust. And the moment that trust cracked, the system began to devour itself. In the spring of 1720, the smartest and most influential investors began to suspect something. The Prince of Conti, one of the highest-ranking aristocrats in France, rolled 3 massive wagons up to Law's bank and demanded to exchange his paper banknotes for gold and silver. When more people like him started doing the same, a terrifying mathematical truth was suddenly exposed. There were tens of times more paper money and shares in circulation than there was gold in all of France. Panic set in. People realized that the papers were completely worthless if everyone tried to sell them at the same time. John Law desperately tried to save his creation. He introduced bans on owning gold coins. He forced the police to search homes for hidden metal. He artificially devalued the old currency. But every single action he took to save the system only sowed greater terror. Restrictions always killed trust faster than any crisis. By the summer of 1720, Paris plunged into chaos. Huge, furious crowds stormed the bank buildings. People were crushed to death in the streets. The shares collapsed into the abyss. Those very millionaires from Rue Quincampoix woke up one morning as beggars, holding nothing but useless scraps of paper. The French economy, which just yesterday seemed invincible, ground to a complete halt. People lost their savings, and trade froze because nobody believed in any money anymore. By December 1720, it was all over. John Law, recently the most powerful man in Europe, secretly fled France in a carriage, hiding from a mob that wanted to tear him to pieces. He died a few years later in Venice, in absolute poverty, never fully understanding why his perfect mathematical model had destroyed a great nation. But the main twist of this story happened later. France didn't just lose money, it suffered a profound, paralyzing psychological trauma. For the next 100 years, the words bank and paper money became dirty words in France. The country rejected financial innovations, retreating back to heavy, slow gold. At exactly the same time, across the English Channel, another nation drew entirely different conclusions. In England, a similar South Sea bubble popped in that same year of 1720, but the English didn't spiral into hysterics. Their Bank of England, founded back in 1694, stood firm. They realized that credit instruments and paper money were weapons of immense power that simply needed to be managed properly. While France was terrified of its own shadow, London slowly and methodically built a stable financial system that ultimately made Britain the ruler of the world. France, in the early 18th century, almost invented the modern economy, a central bank, managing national debt through markets, stimulating trade through liquidity. They came up with all of this first. But the problem wasn't the idea itself. The problem was the speed. A system built entirely on trust physically cannot grow faster than that trust solidifies in the minds of the people. France tried to outrun reality by turning debt into an illusion of infinite wealth. For a brief moment, it worked, but when the fog cleared, it turned out that behind the paper millions lay nothing but the mosquito-infested swamps of Louisiana. And that is exactly why this story strikes at the very heart of modernity. Every time new money appears in the world, or new ways to get rich instantly, or technologies promising to overturn the economy, it is worth asking yourself one brutal but honest question. Is this genuinely new value, or is it just a belief that hasn't run out yet? Because the history of France has already shown us exactly what that finale looks like.